In my last video about this topic, I essentially talked about undead armies as if they were invincible. And undead soldiers most certainly have many advantages, but they also suffer from very grave weaknesses. First and foremost, any army built entirely upon undead has a single and oftentimes total weak spot, their commander. If the creator dies, depending on the setting you are in, the mindless undead will usually disintegrate, become idle, or turn into hostile beasts without any cohesion whatsoever. And not only their commander can die, but his undead minions might as well be destroyed if the right tools are at hand. Which raises one question: how exactly do you kill a walking corpse, an undead enemy kept moving by the dark arcane arts? Well, you can take the Saitama approach and punch it. Since skeletons are animated via magic, this also means you can destroy the magic effect like a magnetic charge by using as much blunt force as possible. This death magnetic analogy might apply especially against skeletons, since their joints aren't protected by living flesh and thusly more prone to damage. And since you can destroy a magnetic charge by applying sufficient heat, the double Hank approach works usually also quite well. In Game of Thrones' case, the rights are protected by strong magic that keeps their limbs moving despite being severed by steel blades. But severed, they are way less effective. And in turn, fire in any shape or form is much more effective. Things like dragonglass and Valyrian steel cut right into the magic field, and thusly rendering the undead dead again. Given the fact that dragonglass tipped spears might be wielded by the unsullied, who are able to withstand repeated Dothraki charges, the normal run-of-the-mill bone boy will sooner freeze to death than break through this line without assistance. So dragonglass and Valyrian steel seems to suspend any animation in Game of Thrones, and such anathemas to undead exist in basically any fantasy world. Usually the religious faction knows more about it, and this is usually any form of healing magic. Another and much more mundane weakness is the micromanagement. Imagine a game of Age of Empires, but with 10,000 units under your direct control at any given moment. Basic undead aren't smart on their own. They will usually run to the enemy in front of them with no regard to unit cohesion or how they would get there. If there's an obvious minefield between the undead and his living adversary, he would just run screaming through it. This is usually not the most effective way of a mass charge. But even if the danger of such traps are a neglectable factor, without proper management the unit cohesion will be more or less break down as soon as the enemy approaches, leaving them divided and very vulnerable. In the fourth Overlord novel, this problem was demonstrated quite nicely. Right at the start of the first battle against the Lizardmen, the Undead Army was parted in two wings. The first wing, on the right side, consisted of skeletons, which are thin and light, and thusly they could move without any problems on the swampy terrain. But the left side of the army consisted of zombies, which got stuck. Every piece of rotting flesh practically merged with the mud below them, making their movements extremely slow and cumbersome. Picking up upon this weakness, the Lizardmen sent light skirmisher units, who constantly harassed the zombies with stone slings on range, luring them away into their direction, so that the main force, consisting of heavy Lizardmen infantry, could launch a brutal frontal assault on the Bone Boys. At this point, a skeleton of maybe 15 kilos had to deal with the impact of a 20-kilo stone mace swung by a drug-crazed 500-kilo Lizardman veteran warrior. Let's just say that the skeletons were at a mild disadvantage. This problem is so severe that you will always need allied necromancers to micromanage certain segments of your army, and such an alliance requires trust. Trust in another dozen guys who are willing to murder hundreds of people in order to join an army that is going to murder thousands of people at the very least. Best case scenario, your underlings are loyal to you since you are the strongest necromancer around, and thusly you are in control of the most elite units, which should be able to shield you from most of the normal zombies and skeletons your allies could send into your direction. Worst case scenario, Infighting occurs and the various undead starting to kill each other on behalf of their masters before being approached by the army they were supposed to fight. Furthermore, due to the recruitment process of any undead army, it is usually mostly made up of foot soldiers. And by soldiers I'm talking, of course, about the inhabitants of the 50 villages you just massacred. If your army consists mostly of skeletons and zombies, then the slower zombies will dictate the movement speed on a strategic level. So if the necromancer gets overconfident and brings his army too close to a major formation of cavalry, then it might get caught off guard and it might be forced to hastily retreat, while leaving the zombies behind to cover your rear. And even worse, thanks to the advantage in speed, independent thought, and overall flexibility, the riders may engage and disengage at their own terms. Worst case scenario, a considerable force of riders armed with stone slings and other means to inflict damage over range, especially fire or holy damage, will destroy the army bit by bit, without ever having to engage the undead army in direct close-quarter combat. But even light and heavy melee cavalry might be able to inflict significant amount of damage by using their ability to concentrate more of their numbers in a certain section of the battlefield, in order to create a local superiority. This is a mix between defeat in detail and hit-and-run tactic. And as long as the cavalry in question is able to dictate time and length of the engagement, even a considerable larger army will be gradually worn down and annihilated by this approach to warfare. Additionally, considering that skeletons without any flesh on them are extremely light, especially compared to a charging knight in heavy armor on a horse also covered in heavy armor, their massive weight would simply squish the already rotting and decomposing flesh of zombies and break the bone of skeleton soldiers. Furthermore, even if the skeletons would form a cohesive spear line, most of them lost a fair bit of their weight, so an entire segment of the undead army could be wiped out simply by riding through them. Dragonglass spears should be able to kill on impact, and the same thing applies for basically any magic lances. Just have your priest bless it, or apply holy water yourself and ride like you're lifting the siege of Minas Tirith. Also in many settings flying units, such as hippogriffs, wyverns or giant eagles exist. Beings that for normal undead are hard to reach and therefore hard to kill. These strong and highly mobile units are able to strike from above, directly against the leading necromancer. If, let's say, 10 wyverns are closing in, your 5000 zombies wouldn't be able to prevent them from attacking you. Against this local superiority, the necromancer would be almost helpless, unless he's able to unleash truly devastating offensive spells or has means of escape like teleportation. The only real defense a necromancer would have against these kinds of attacks and raids is to recruit good archers, and skeletons usually have some problems with archery, or preferable, flying undead to keep the enemy engaged and occupied, preferable while on ground until the necromancer can bring the sheer weight of his numbers to bear. Alternatively, he could employ living beings or hire mercenaries in order to counter cavalry charges or to shoot down flying units. But this is also incredibly risky, as an army of life-hating undead is usually a no-go on anyone's curriculum, at least outside of the Sorcerer Kingdom. So yeah, an alliance between the Night King and the Golden Company is unlikely to happen. And speaking of your reputation, well, congratulations! You are now a target for constant assassination attempts. I mean, let's face it, you're a vile being and a threat to every living creature, which makes your head quite valuable. If anybody realizes what a great danger you and your undead pose, any army, any nobleman, and any wannabe hero will make you their prime target. Slay the necromancer, become one of the greatest heroes of mankind. Every living being has an interest in your downfall. Every John Wick wants to put his pencil through your eyeballs. So in conclusion, while the undead are incredible good soldiers, they are also incredible stupid, unflexible, and have a slight problem when it comes to public relationship. And on top of all of this, they will usually have an arch enemy. I mean, think of it that way. If undead are essentially animated by dark magic, then Hegelian dialectic dictates that there's also light magic, which usually aids the living. In Overlord there are temples, and they use a good portion of their money to found holy warriors, essentially zealots, blessed with holy magic, armor, and weaponry, and they purge undead by the dozens with each incantation of their deities. In Game of Thrones, the Red Priestess of R'hllor had literally millennia to prepare for this very moment. In Warhammer, the vampires are threatened by witch hunters and holy men alike. In Skyrim, their rest is disturbed, and their tombs are raided by some unbelievable loud, obnoxious, cheese-wheel-devouring madmen. And in Konosuba, well, let's not talk about her. Over and out.